3, 2, 1. Hey, good evening. Welcome to Hockey Primetime. I'm Conor McKenna, the host of the show, and very, very pleased to be with you for the newest episode of the program. We're live here in Montreal. I wouldn't say it's a snowstorm, but we got some snow falling. It's quite, to be fair, and it's been a rough winter here, but it's kind of a nice day. It's not nasty outside. It's just a little bit of snow, a little bit of a sprinkling, as the Nashville Predators get ready to visit the Bell Center for the only time this season. And, finally, the Canadiens are playing a game worth watching on Saturday night when so often it really is probably a better idea for the sake of entertainment if you're a hockey fan, or for the sake of your own mental health if you're a Habs fan, to watch another team play just because they play such mind-numbingly boring hockey. But no, in this case, the Nashville Predators are here, one of the most exciting teams in the game. And as you know, the return of PK Subban. I'm Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime. Laura Saba is here with me, the producer of the show. We're with you for the next 2 hours or so, jam-packed with a lot of guests. We're very excited about this show today. Laura has booked many guests, and many of whom are some of my favorite people to talk hockey with. I will let you know more about that. And, of course, the Olympics are underway. I will unveil my Team Canada, my official Team Canada roster for the Olympics. No, not the Spengler Cup also ran roster that we're going to see at the Olympics this year. No, I'm saying what my Team Canada would look like, which is a fun exercise. And I'd be pleased if you wanted to follow along, send me your ideas. That would make me very, very happy. Laura, everything good?
Everything's great. I'm very excited about today's show.
Are you?
I am.
You're not just saying that.
No.
You're legitimately excited.
No, I actually am.
Me too. I really am. And you know what? I love doing this show. I really do. It does mean I work on the weekend. So it sometimes does take a slice out of my, my ability to maybe go do something on the weekend, go somewhere, right? 5 o'clock on Saturday. That's tough.
Yeah.
You go away on Friday. You got to be back by Saturday. You can't go away on Saturday. You got to work on Saturday evening. But no, in all seriousness, the show always flies by. I really do enjoy doing this. And I hope you enjoy listening to us here as well. So the Predators are in town tonight, and why not? Why not revisit a little bit of history for both the Nashville Predators and the Montreal Canadiens? I figured that's how we'd start the show. So what did they say, Laura? What's the millennial expression for, like, when people get angry? Like, is it activated, or, you know what I mean?
To get heated?
No. It might be activated. It's a thing that millennials, like they say woke, meaning like, you're very aware of stuff, you know what I mean? You're like, whether it's, being sarcastic or not, but it's like when you see something that makes you angry, when people see or hear something maybe online that makes them angry. I don't know if activated might be the word. Anyway, that's if you're one of the people triggered, that might be it. Triggered might be it. Thank you, Rob. So maybe it's triggered. If you're the type of person who gets triggered by people talking about Marc Bergevin doing a bad job as general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, this is the only time I'll say this, because really one of the first rules of radio is do not encourage people to tune out. It's really the last thing you want to do. You want as many people as possible to listen to you. And I truly do. But I don't want you to be angry. I don't want you to get upset. You know what I mean? It's Saturday evening. We're here to talk hockey. It's fun and it's important, but it's not that important. So if you're the type of person who gets triggered by talk about the Subban-Weber trade, especially as it pertains to the effects that it's had on both franchises, you probably shouldn't listen to this. All right, now you've been warned. The Predators are in town tonight, and boy, does the Subban-Weber trade look terrible these days. And anybody who's been listening to me knows I thought it looked terrible from day one, and really was quite vocal about this. I mean, you can go back in time, you can trace my Twitter account. I didn't really waver on this. I thought it was really the worst thing that the Canadiens had done since Patrick Roy was traded for a whole bunch of guys that nobody remembers. Look, I love Shea Weber. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Shea Weber. I understand that Shea Weber is a guy that Team Canada admires very much. But Shea Weber is 4 years older than PK Subban. And the big thing was, for those that defended the trade, was, wow, I mean, that's a crazy trade, but this will make the Canadiens better in the short term. Sure, Weber's 4 years older than Subban, but in the short term, the Canadiens will be a better team. That's obviously not true, and that's demonstrably not true. The Canadiens are a much worse team since making the trade. They managed to make the playoffs and lose in the first round, and they this year will not make the postseason, whereas the Nashville Predators are a team that's looking again like a Stanley Cup contender after falling 2 wins short of the Stanley Cup a year ago. And another thing that a lot of people would say was that PK Subban was disliked by his teammates. His teammates didn't like him. He rubbed people the wrong way, that PK Subban, right? There was like, I remember people suggesting that his charitable donation was something that really bothered his teammates. And to be fair, really what we should call it is a charitable pledge that Subban made to the Montreal Children's Hospital. Remember the much ballyhooed $10 million pledge. And I don't think the organization liked it very much. The Canadiens are very active in the community. They've got their own hospital initiatives that they're involved in. They were not involved in Subban's donation and the naming of the atrium in the new Montreal Super Hospital, just actually a couple of blocks away from us here at the Hockey Primetime studio. So there was that, right? His teammates, the organization, the coach, nobody liked him, and everybody wanted to blame Michel Therrien for this too. I don't really understand that. But the guys, and if you saw it, Subban's in town. He went to the Children's Hospital yesterday. Of course he did. They have an atrium named after him. There's a bunch of kids there who know and love him. And he was there, and he brought a bunch of his teammates along. He brought Roman Josi and Ryan Johansson and Nick Bonino. An all-star cast of characters was alongside with PK Subban. Seems those guys don't have a problem with him. Of course, you hear you can't win with a guy like Subban. Well, Subban's been to 3 conference finals and 1 Stanley Cup final. The guy he was traded for has never been out of the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Anyway, it is amazing how the trade looks like a turning point for both franchises. Now, it's very possible, again, that you liked the trade at the time, but I would urge you to be objective and just sort of look at the 2 franchises and what's happened since then. Now, there are those who don't want to give PK Subban any credit, right? And this has always been the case. They want to blame him for things when they go wrong, and when things go well, it's because of somebody else. It's not because of Subban. You can't say that the Subban trade is what turned the Predators franchise around. They also did this. They also did that. You can't say it's the Subban trade that ruined the Canadiens franchise. Marc Bergevin also did this. He also did that. Yada, yada, yada. However, I really do think it's a crucial point here. Now, if you want to close your eyes and picture the Nashville Predators and the Montreal Canadiens organization and put it on an XY axis on a chart, and you look at where the 2 franchises were at the time that trade was made, and then you look at the fortunes of the 2 teams since then. I understand there's other variables in place other than this trade, but it was a turning point for both franchises. The Nashville Predators were a good NHL team that really, and to say good, maybe not. No, they were a medium, middle of the pack NHL team for years. They made the playoffs every year, and they would usually lose in the first round. One time they got out of the first round, at least that I can remember. And then they made the trade, and then they became a Stanley Cup contending team. Now, these are facts. They're not debatable. This is just a true thing that happened. Now, again, maybe there are other variables at play. When PK Subban was a member of the Montreal Canadiens, the Canadiens appeared in 2 conference finals over the course of his 6 years with the team. Since they have made the trade, they have lost in the first round in a series they were never really in against the New York Rangers, and now will fail to qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And most fans at this point are sort of hoping they end up somehow lucky enough, New Jersey Devils style, to land the number 1 pick this year and the right to draft Rasmus Dahlin. It's again, I mean, it is a turning point for both teams. And I don't see how it's really possible to see it otherwise, other than maybe you are one of those people who just feels like they made their mind up about the deal and their mind cannot be changed. And maybe I'm one of those people, because like I said, I made my mind up about the trade the day that it happened, and you can and go through it. And you know what, Eric Engels on Sportsnet this week, just a couple of days ago, might have even been yesterday, did a great write-up of what Marc Bergevin has done to the Canadiens. Not just the Subban trade, but it started there. And that's the thing, is that it started there and sort of set off a chain of events, this catastrophic chain of events that Marc Bergevin is at the center of just completely dismantling what was a good roster and turning it into a terrible team. I mean, this is a bad hockey team. And now you have the Carey Price extension. There's legitimate questions being asked about that. It hasn't even kicked in yet. Remember, 8 years and what, $84 million. I mean, that's a big number for a guy who is now routinely giving up bad goals and has a terrible defense in front of him, to be fair. But there's a lot of other factors at play. I don't mean to pretend that this is the only reason that the Predators are one of, if not the hottest team in the NHL right now, and they made a Stanley Cup final a year ago, and who really would bet against them right now in the Western Conference? Who do you like more than Nashville? With that experience and with that roster and with the flexibility even to maybe add a guy or two at the trade deadline. Rick Nash, anyone? See him in that Nashville roster. Of course, his name is Nash after all. But no, in all seriousness, I expect that they'll add somebody. And again, we'll contend for the Stanley Cup this year, whereas in Montreal, people are talking about, okay, it's time to blow it up. Max Pacioretty, see ya. Alex Galchenyuk, see ya, and a number of other guys as well, right? I mean, it is remarkable what's happened to these two teams. And I would say at this point, you got to be pretty naive not to see it. Again, just picture the chart. Now, the decline started there. The rise out of sort of middle of the pack for Nashville started there, and the fall from being good and sort of routinely winning the division and winning playoff rounds in Montreal, the change from that to being a lottery contending team, I believe they're 27th in the NHL today, started on that day. These are facts. I don't know if we can really debate it. And it's going to be fun to see, because for Marc Bergevin, he is embattled right now. Our next guest, Sean McIndoe, wrote about it at Sportsnet this week. Second shout out to Sportsnet in this segment. Jeez. He wrote about it this week, writing about the 12 general managers who are sort of in the, I might even have it written down here, the GMs under the most pressure. And Marc Bergevin was number one on that list. But how can you, and what a strange position Jeff Molson, the owner, and the Canadiens are in right now. If Jeff Molson heard what I just said, and I doubt he did, but maybe he did, how can he, after having me sort of explain what's happened here with Marc Bergevin, again, you can read Engels' piece if he wants a more sort of in-depth breakdown of all these terrible moves that the general manager made. How could you trust him to trade Max Pacioretty, Alex Galchenyuk? They're talking about Shea Weber as a trade target. I mean, that would be certainly something that would help the team's prospects long-term with that contract sort of hanging over them. Shea Weber's got like 9 more years on his contract after this one. Just totally insane. Anyway. Tonight, PK Subban at the Bell Center, the Nashville Predators. It's pretty much always must-see TV, as far as I'm concerned. Very, very fun team to watch. And you got a bunch of games that are worth watching tonight. The Battle of Ontario, the Ottawa Senators. Well, they've been a little bit better lately. Matt Duchene has woken up and is playing some good hockey for them, but too little too late for a team that is closer to last than they are to a playoff spot. And what else do we have going on? Well, the Rangers, what a crazy story that is with that franchise sort of meeting the end of an era and writing that letter to the fans. How do you feel about that if you're a Rangers fan? Do you like it? It seems like a lot of people liked it. It does send a kind of a weird message to the people who work for and play for the hockey team. At least that's what I thought. Coming up next, let's talk about those general managers that are under pressure. The trade deadline is less than 3 weeks away. We're going to talk to Sean McIndoe. He's Down Goes Brown. You can read his work with Sportsnet, Vice Sports, and elsewhere. Hopefully, if you are a hockey fan, you follow him on Twitter. We'll talk to Sean McIndoe, who recently celebrated 10 years of Down Goes Brown. That's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. We're also streaming live on Periscope, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and probably other places as well. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back right after this. Amanda's brother say it the other day. Three, two, one. Hey, welcome back. This is Hockey Primetime. Happy Saturday night to you. We got 11 games on schedule. I like this, a Saturday with no afternoon games. I'm not down with afternoon games. I can deal with them on Sunday, especially when NFL season is over, but I don't really like daytime hockey that much. I like my days for lounging and doing nothing, watching bad television or good television or movies I've already seen, stuff like that. Watch Keanu on, it was on the movie channel today. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's a Key and Peele chasing a kitten. And I mean, it doesn't sound very good, but it is a very funny movie. Love that. Speaking of very funny, our next guest is joining us and celebrating actually 10 years of Down Goes Brown. His name is Sean McIndoe. You can read his work at Sportsnet, Vice Sports, and elsewhere. Sean, good afternoon. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
Thanks for making time for us here. We appreciate it. And happy 10-year anniversary. That's amazing.
Yeah, thanks. It's about 9 years and 3 weeks longer than I thought it would last. So.
And I mean, I guess it means we've been talking to one another periodically for not 10 years, but we're certainly, it's been a while. It's crazy. It's one of those things that just sort of, it reminds you how quickly time can sort of pass. Like, were you surprised when you realized it was 10 years?
I was surprised, and I felt very old. Yeah, I went back and reread that very first post that I read 10 years ago, which was me reacting to the Montreal Canadiens losing a hockey game. And boy, things, so much can change over the course of a decade.
And you can still go to the website, downgoesbrown.com. You can also read Sean's work elsewhere, including at Sportsnet, where this week he had pieces like the 12 GMs under the most pressure list. And I was hoping you'd be willing to talk about a couple of those with me and some of the other stuff you've been working on the last couple of days. Let's start with John Chayka, number 12 on your list of the GMs under the most pressure. It's been a weird season in Arizona. I guess there may have been some optimism there for the first time in the last 10 years, maybe, or something like that. And then it blew up very quickly with that sort of catastrophic start to the season. I'd be curious for your feel on sort of what he needs to do and how much trouble he might be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think he could be in a fair amount of trouble. And this is sort of where I think there is a distinction between being a GM on the hot seat, which is a list that lots of people do throughout the season. I've done a couple of my own, versus being a GM who is under pressure over the next couple of weeks to get certain things done for the trade deadline. You know, you look at the Coyotes. Obviously, a disaster of a season under any circumstances, but especially given that they, like you say, they made those moves in the summer that seemed to indicate that, okay, guys, the tank is all done, and now it's time to actually push forward and be a reasonably good hockey team, and at least make a run at a playoff spot. And of course, you know, that thought had disappeared 2 weeks into the season after the start that they got off to. So, you know, I think that certainly, you know, we all know by now that he is a young guy, not a ton of experience at the NHL management level, and so how much benefit the doubt he'll get remains to be seen. And I do think he probably is under a fair amount of pressure, job security wise. The reason I didn't have him any higher on the list and didn't have him, you know, maybe as high as I thought I might, is I'm just not sure when I look at that Arizona roster what exactly they're supposed to do over the next few weeks, because this is not a team that has a lot of obvious short-term rental candidates that you would normally see on a seller coming into the deadline. I'm just not sure, as much work as he has cut out for him to fix that team, I'm just not sure how much of it he can reasonably be expected to do over the next few weeks as opposed to the off season and beyond.
I don't know about you. I find myself being disappointed by it because I think there's no small part of me that was really sort of rooting for him to succeed. Him being so, It was out of the mold, right? What Arizona did, bringing this guy in, even with his age notwithstanding, really his background and the fact that he had this reputation as being a bit of a numbers guy, clearly a brilliant guy, and I'm sure he's going to land on his feet no matter what happens going forward. But I was at this, sort of a weird aside here, but I was at this NHL Board of Governors thing to celebrate the NHL centennial. It was like a luncheon, and all the GMs were there. This was a couple of months ago, and they all walk in. And Chaika just stands out like a sore thumb in this group of guys. He's so much younger and of course, not really a recognizable guy, at least before he got the job. I'd be curious for your sort of feel on that and if you feel it all the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice if only because, yeah, like you say, it'd be nice to see some creativity rewarded. I saw something, and I can't remember who tweeted it out, but somebody had sent around, and it was just charts of each of the major pro sports leagues and how many of the GMs from each league have a playing background versus how many had a background anywhere else. And I mean, the NHL one just stuck out so obviously because it was almost entirely made up of former players. I mean, I think there's something like 3 or 4 guys in the entire league that are GMs that weren't NHL players, and that is very different from the makeup of the other leagues where it was in most cases under 50%. So the NHL is a real outlier here, and whether you want to make the case that hockey is somehow different and that having actually had that experience in the sport is more important in hockey than elsewhere, or whether you want to draw what would seem like a more obvious conclusion, which is that we've got a little bit of an old boys club problem in this league, and guys are coasting as much off of name recognition as actual qualifications to do the job. Maybe that's a debate we leave for another day, but to see a team kind of go almost out in left field to pick an executive like that, and certainly there were some unusual circumstances in Arizona, but it would have been neat to see it succeed. And maybe it still does. He's only been on the job for a couple of years, but you don't get a lot of time in this league when things aren't going well, and certainly things aren't going very well in Arizona these days.
Yeah, what a terrible start, and what a just another bad season. And I do know this. I can say this for sure, based on my interactions with people I know in the hockey world, that there are a lot of people rooting against John Chaika, and there has been from day one. And I don't think that that's really changed since the day that he was hired. So that is another thing that makes me want to see him succeed. I really was hoping, but goaltending is an issue, and there's all kinds of issues there. I mean, Oliver Ekman-Larsson hasn't really been himself. Anyway, whatever. Enough about the Arizona Coyotes. Let's move on. How about Ron Francis, another guy you wrote about? You should definitely check out Sean's piece at sportsnet.ca to get the full list and to see his breakdown of why each and every one of the 12 general managers under the most pressure are there. But another topic that's always fascinated me is the sort of the awkwardness, and you referred to this, of hiring a franchise icon. And in the case of Ron Francis, the best player in franchise history, as your general manager, right? Because when things go bad, things also get kind of awkward.
Yeah, exactly. And, we just talked about teams hiring former players, and certainly you take that to the next level when it's a situation where you got Joe Sakic in Colorado, Ron Francis, Ron Hextall in Philadelphia, the guys in LA, and not to mention it seems to be pretty much the entire Edmonton Oilers front office strategy to just keep bringing in former star players, and we've seen how well that works out for them. So it does create an awkward situation, and like I said in the piece, if the 2 words you don't want to hear as a GM, it's playoff drought. And if there's 2 more words that you don't want to hear after that, it's new ownership. And Ron Francis has got both of those. And in theory, that would put him in some significant danger and put him in a situation where he would really want to show what he can do over the next few weeks. The flip side of that, of course, is it's Ron Francis. This guy is literally the franchise in Carolina. When you've got an owner coming in saying, hey, let's bring back Brass Bonanza, let's bring back the Whalers uniforms, let's really celebrate our history, it's almost impossible to imagine that same owner turning around and saying, oh, but by the way, I'm going to fire Ron Francis. I can't imagine he's in any danger in that sense. But, is there the potential that the owner comes in and says, maybe we're going to move you upstairs and bring in somebody else. Maybe we're going to make you the president or whatever else, but we're going to have someone else making the decisions. I don't know. I mean, Ron Francis has, it's weird. You look at individual moves that team has made over the years, and a lot of them seem to have worked out pretty well. The Scott Darling one kind of sticks out as the big exception there. But I think a lot of what they've done on an individual level, you look at it and you go, yeah, this makes sense. These guys know what they're doing. But this is a results-oriented league, as we are always told, and the results have not been there recently for Carolina, and haven't been there for most of the last decade. This year has been, a little, maybe a little bit hit and miss, and certainly they've got a chance to break that playoff streak. But yeah, you kind of wonder, whenever there's a new owner, you're not really sure how much pressure everyone around is going to be under to make sure they deliver the results that he's looking for.
It's amazing, though, too, because you mentioned Scott Darling, and I don't think you can have a conversation about Ron Francis's job security without mentioning Scott Darling, because really, Scott Darling was supposed to come in and make some saves, and he was not able to do that. And they had bad goaltending, but that's a nice roster. They've got some really good players coming up too. Like, I don't know about you, but I feel like Ron Francis has done a good job. Like, ultimately, he's got to be held accountable, I suppose, for the fact that the guy he brought in to make saves, not making saves. But it's amazing how much it sort of comes down to that, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and what's interesting when you look at the Hurricanes is, you're right. There is a ton of talent there, especially on the blue line. They've got such a good young blue line, and that puts them in an interesting, almost kind of old school position, in the sense that if we're talking about the Carolina Hurricanes having to go out there and looking to make a trade that's potentially going to help them get into the playoffs, typically when you're talking about that, you're talking about the modern day rental. You're talking about trading a draft pick or a prospect for somebody who's going to come in for a couple of months and give you that little boost. And when you look at the Hurricanes, they're in a position where maybe the answer for them is to go out and make an actual hockey trade, and go out and say, we're going to give up something of value to get something of value back, either in a different position or a different spot in the roster, something like that. And maybe do they draw from that good young blue line and go out and I don't think you're necessarily going to be able to solve a goaltending issue mid-season. That's very tough to do, but do they go out and get some help up front? We know they were rumored to be in the mix on Matt Duchene. Is there another deal like that could potentially be out there? That would be interesting, because I think they are one of those teams that you look at their path to improve, and it doesn't necessarily just involve shipping out future assets to bring in some short-term help.
With Sean McIndoe, a.k.a. Down Goes Brown. You can read his work at Sportsnet and at Vice Sports, where his grab bag went up yesterday, I believe it was. And I wanted to ask you about something that I read in there as well. I'm guilty of this as somebody who considers himself a baseball fan, of not really paying attention to the offseason in baseball, especially in the winter. I don't know why. It's just not on my radar. I'm watching football. I'm reading about the NFL. I'm into hockey for sure. But what's going on in Major League Baseball in the offseason is fascinating. And the way that you put it, I thought was perfect. These crazy contracts that so often, and we've seen teams do this time after time, right? Albert Pujols or Alex Rodriguez, all these guys who get a $250 million contract when their best years are already behind them. And it seems like baseball is sort of figuring out that maybe this isn't such a good idea. And that is affecting free agency in a huge way right now. There's also been the allegations of collusion and all the rest of it. But if you could, and I would urge everybody to go take a look at Sean's piece on Vice Sports. But what does this make you think of when you think of the National Hockey League? I mean, obviously, baseball's got the luxury tax system. The NHL's got the salary cap system. But what, if anything, could this have to do with hockey?
Yeah, it's one of these things where it's, on the surface, it maybe doesn't have a lot to do with hockey, because what is happening is basically baseball has a very, very active free agency market, or at least it normally does. And they have lots of star players who reach free agency, and most years there's really big contracts being thrown around. And this year, for the most part, there hasn't been to the point where we're now into February, and training camp's going to start soon, and there's a lot of guys that are still not signed, and a lot of people are trying to figure out what's going on. And yeah, like you say, the collusion word has been mentioned, and among other theories. And on the surface, that doesn't have a lot to do with hockey, because hockey doesn't have much of a free agent market. Hockey doesn't have the luxury tax that is potentially creating some of this, and it doesn't have the history of collusion that baseball does. But the flip side is that at least one of the theories about what exactly is happening in baseball is that you're seeing this sudden reckoning and sudden realization among teams that, wait a second, the way that we're doling out the money in this sport doesn't make sense. We've got guys, in baseball, a guy comes into the league, he's cost controlled and relatively cheap for the first several years of his career. And even after that, you've got arbitration and various ways to hold on to guys at probably below market values. And then they finally hit free agency and you throw all this money at them, or somebody does, to get them under contract. But by then, their best years are often behind them. And a lot of times you're given 8 or 10 year contracts to guys who are only going to be in the prime of their career for less than half of that, and the rest of it you're just kind of throwing away down the stretch. And the situation in hockey is, we don't have free agency for the most part, but the reason we don't have that is because guys get signed to these big 8-year extensions. And I'm not talking the Conor McDavids here. I'm talking the guy, the Brent Burns, even the Carey Prices, guys that are, presumably coming towards the end of their prime, and yet they cash in on the big contract then at the end. And what we might be seeing happening in baseball, there are other theories, but what we might be seeing happening is that teams are saying, this doesn't make sense. We're not going to do this anymore. And if that sort of thinking came to hockey, and it probably should, because you look at the aging curves in hockey, they're even more extreme than they are in baseball in terms of the young guys being the ones who are driving the results. If NHL GMs suddenly realize that, wait a second, it doesn't make sense to give a 7 or 8 year extension to a guy who's already 28 or 29 years old, that could have a major impact on not just free agency, but how teams hand out extensions, the trade market. Are some of these guys suddenly available that wouldn't normally be? And it could be a really kind of fascinating situation, not one that's going to cost the players money in the big picture, because the salary cap basically makes that impossible. They get 50% no matter what. But in terms of how that money is distributed and maybe redistributed around the league, it could really be fascinating to watch that play out, and to watch how certain players and certain organizations would react to that, and maybe even more importantly, which teams figure it out first and lead the way, and which ones are caught napping and keep doing things the old way, even if maybe that's not the way that things should be run anymore.
Yeah, I feel like I could see Marc Bergevin maybe being one of the late bloomers on that, but we'll see what happens. Like, it could happen to the Canadiens with Max Pacioretty. It maybe has already happened, as you point out, with Carey Price, and they do have Shea Weber. I mean, they didn't give him that contract, but it runs for like another 9 years, and the guy's 32 years old. Interesting stuff here in Montreal. Hey, Sean, a pleasure as always. Sincere congratulations on 10 years. I've enjoyed every one of them, and I really do appreciate you making time for us tonight.
Thanks very much, and anytime you want to have me on, you know where to find me. That's
Sean McIndoe with Sportsnet and Vice Sports. Coming up next, let's talk Lightning. I mean, they're not bad. They got blown out by the Edmonton Oilers the other night. What's going on with the Lightning? Since New Year's, they've been kind of a mediocre team. Bryan Burns with the Tampa Bay Lightning official website is going to tell us what he thinks about that next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Brian's there. I got a clip of
Gotcha.
LeCavalier, and I'll put your mic on after that.
Boyle out to center ice. Brings LeCavalier across the blue line. A circle shot. Score! A big goal for LeCavalier! 2-1 Lightning, and the power play is still pending with 7:42 left in the second.
I can't believe Dave Mishkin still has a voice after all these years. Sometimes I hear Dave Mishkin call a goal, and I'm like, what would it sound like if they won the Stanley Cup? Like, he gets so fired up for, like, the second goal of a game in a regular season game. What would happen? Well, you can find out. It exists. The Lightning won the Stanley Cup. He was on the call. You can hear. And he is as excited as he could possibly be. Welcome back. This is Hockey Primetime. Speaking of the Tampa Bay Lightning and Vincent LeCavalier, that was the highlight you just heard. It is Vinny LeCavalier night. What a nice couple of weeks it's been in Tampa. All-Star Weekend. And now Vincent LeCavalier, one of the most, if not, I think maybe the most member of that team in franchise history, will have number 4 raised to the rafters at the Emily Arena there in Tampa Bay. With more on that, we welcome from TampaBayLightning.com Bryan Burns to the show. Hello, Bryan.
Hey, Connor, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. Like, I know I don't sound as excited as Dave Mishkin when the Lightning scored a goal, but I am very excited to have you on, believe me. All right. So,
I've heard Michigan make that goal call in a preseason game, just so you know.
Right. Yes. I don't know how he hangs on to his voice. Like, I would not be able to do that, but perhaps he drinks some sort of special tea or something like that. All right. So, Bryan, Vincent LeCavalier night, what does he mean to this franchise?
Well, I mean, when you think of the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think most people think either Vinny LeCavalier or Marty St. Louis. He's one of those two iconic guys, really the first superstar, I guess you could say, in Tampa Bay Lightning history. And, you know, beyond just the number of games that he played for the Lightning and the goals and the points that he put up, I really think the mark that he left with the community is maybe his greatest legacy here in Tampa Bay. Just known as such a generous guy. He donated $3 million for the Vinny LeCavalier Pediatric Cancer Center at All Children's Hospital in St. Pete. And really just known as one of those guys who's out in the community, out doing good in the community. And he kind of inspired other players like Steven Stamkos. I know a few years back, he talked about Vinny's contributions to the community, and he kind of wanted to follow that same model. Ryan Callahan is another guy. I spoke to Victor Hedman today, and he said Vinny's just kind of an inspiration for the rest of the guys, and just kind of is the model for how they want to be known in the community and how they want to contribute and give back to the community. So I think more than anything, just beyond the play on the ice, it's how he was perceived off the ice. That's really his legacy here down in Tampa.
And of course, that magical Stanley Cup run all those years ago, although it was Brad Richards who was sort of the center stage guy, if memory serves, but he was great nonetheless. And yeah, I mean, that's the way you sort of cement a legacy, right? And he had there was so much pressure when he came in, right? I don't remember what the owner said, and you might recall this. I don't know if it was the owner or the general manager came in and said, like, this guy's the Michael Jordan of hockey or something like that. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, that was the owner at the time, Art Williams. He said when they drafted Vinny, they called him the Michael Jordan of hockey, and he admitted, the owner later admitted, he knew nothing about hockey at the time. He was a basketball and football guy, so he was just looking to try to get people into the seats at the arena at that time, and he thought he could connect with fans that way. But yeah, that was an enormous amount of pressure to put on a number 1 overall pick. You already have a ton of pressure anyway when you're coming in and kind of seen as the savior of a franchise at that point. And the first couple of years, he had a really good rookie season, and a couple of years he kind of butted heads with John Tortorella a little bit. And but around, I think it was the 2002-03 season where he really took off. From that point on, he scored 30 goals and had 30-plus goals for 5 straight seasons after that, and really just helped engineer those 4 consecutive playoff runs for the Lightning.
Yeah, peaking with a 108-point season, 52 goals in 06-07. His numbers, I will say, in Russia during the lockout for Akbar is a little bit underwhelming, only 15 points in 30 games. But I think we can forgive him that, a very defensive league. All right, let's talk about the here and now. and the Lightning team. They were the best team in the NHL for the first couple months of the season. Since the calendar year has turned to 2018, they have been kind of less good, and maybe it started before that. I'm curious to know what you think. Is there any genuine cause for concern with the way the club is playing right now? I mean, I don't know how concerned you can be about a team that's in their position, but maybe they don't win the division. Maybe that means a tougher matchup. Or are we talking about an effect on their expectations as far as the Stanley Cup goes?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the start that they had was so phenomenal that they kind of allowed themselves some the ability to maybe go on a little bit of a slide here in the dog days of the season. But it really hasn't been that big of a slide. If you look at their wins and losses in the schedule, they might lose 2 in a row, but it's rare that they lose more than 2 in a row. They don't let those losing streaks build up. And they've gone through a really difficult part of the schedule here in February, and it's still pretty difficult for them through the remainder of this month. They went on that long 8-game road trip that was kind of sandwiched around the All-Star game. And they had those 4 games in Western Canada, which is always a tough trip for this team, just as far as the flights are concerned and the travel time and, the time of year it is up in Western Canada and flights being canceled and whatnot. So once they get through February, as long as they can stay around 500, I think in February, I think they're poised to go on a pretty good run over March and April. They have a lot of home games in March. 9 of their 14 games will be played at Amalie Arena in March, and then they have 3 of 4 at home in April. So the schedule sets up well for them to go on a little run down the stretch here.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is, too, when I think about falling out of first, and if that does happen, Boston's 3 points back. There's 2 games in hand, and the Bruins are as hot as any team in the NHL right now. So would that mean a matchup with the Leafs? If so, would you rather face the Leafs than one of the 2 wildcard teams that are inevitably going to come out of the Metropolitan Division? Anyway, I know teams aren't picking and choosing with things like this. They'll take what they can get, but we saw this in Montreal last year. The Canadiens won the division and ended up with kind of an unfavorable matchup. And they ended up losing in the first round. Now, I think this Tampa team's a lot better than the Habs are, but it is a sort of a fascinating thing with this. We can't even call it the new playoff format, but with the current playoff format, for sure. What's the story with Victor Hedman? Is he going to be back anytime soon?
Yeah, he's been back for the last couple games. It was really fortunate for the Lightning when he got injured in that game against Calgary back on January.
Should probably break soon.
Looked like it could have been if not an extended injury for the rest of the season, it looked like it could have been a season-ending injury, the way his knee kind of bent there in that game. But it was fortunate that injury occurred right before the Lightning's bye week. Then they came back for 1 home game and went out on a trip that he missed, a 4-game road trip. But then they had the All-Star break right after that. So he really only ended up missing 5 games for an injury that was supposed to be a 4 to 6 week injury. So timing more than anything really allowed really helped the Lightning out as far as Hedman's injury was concerned there.
Bryan, I wish we had more time, man. Thank you for making time for us here today, and I hope we can have a little bit more of it next time around. Cheers.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
That's Bryan Burns, TampaBayLightning.com. Coming up next, Sean FitzGerald. Let's talk Leafs on Hockey Primetime. real something. What's that with the one with the lemon?
So down after it in the corner. Reverse now, Forsberg comes over to the right side, off for Subban, and he scores! PK Subban wound up.
10 seconds.
Net again, this time by Philip Forsberg, and the Predators are on the board 19 seconds into the second period.
Oh, well, that matches a career high, 15 goals for PK Subban, and he comes in to the Bell Center tonight with a chance to set a career high in goals, to put another dagger in the heart of Marc Bergevin's Montreal Canadiens. The schedule makers, I mean, they couldn't have possibly known this ahead of time, but the timing seems fortuitous for PK to make his latest return to Montreal, to say the least. They really did a nice job honoring him last year. And, we'll see what happens this year. He's been making his swing through Eastern Canada, and he was in Toronto the other day, and our next guest had a chance to catch up with him. His name is Sean FitzGerald. You should read it in The Athletic Toronto. And if you subscribe to The Athletic, you can read all of their coverage of every sport in every city that they're in. One tiny sliver of one day spent in Toronto with PK Subban, the life of the NHL's party. And what a great photo, too, under the headline with Sean FitzGerald of The Athletic. Hello, Sean.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Did you have fun hanging out with PK Subban the other day?
Did he play in Montreal before? I didn't know that.
Yeah, last year.
No kidding, eh?
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, he played with the Canadiens.
Oh, I see.
I just assumed Nashville drafted him.
Yeah. So a team traded that guy. Try to figure that out.
Well, I mean, obviously, why would you want somebody who drives possession, can score goals, can also sell the game off the ice for you, and is also just a dedicated philanthropist? You just can't have that in the room.
Apparently not. But isn't it amazing? And I mean, I covered him for years. He really does have that sort of that superstar quality that I find, honestly, to be so rare in hockey players. And well, I mean, I'm curious to hear what you think, but you had a chance to hang out with him. Did you feel that?
I mean, hangout's kind of a bit of a stretch. You sort of orbit PK Subban when he comes to Toronto. Like, he's there, he goes on the ice. You absolutely know when PK Subban goes on the ice because, maybe he'll do a spinorama or he'll do something crazy. But then, like, off the ice, like, he just, they had a kid come in from Aurelia, so a couple hours north of Toronto, and he'd gone through a medical issue. He'd overcome something, and he was a Leaf fan. He was wearing a Leafs tube. And PK treated him like he was just, another member of the team. He and Pekka Rinne were sitting there, and they're asking, what's the score going to be tonight? And the kid goes 3-1. And PK goes, well, how many goals am I going to get? 1. And how many goals are the Leafs going to get? 3. He goes, wait, I'm going to lose 3-0. And then Pekka Rinne is going, well, who's going to score 3 goals on me? And, the kid lists Austin Matthews. Pekka Rinne says, nope. Mitch Marner, nope. But, like, the whole atmosphere, the way that he understands his position and the power that he has, like, that's something that takes 5 or 7 minutes of his life. But that's something that kid who is 5 or 6 years old is going to remember forever. And, I'm at a Toronto hockey rink right now to go on the ice for a practice. And I've spent some time in some minor hockey barns here in Toronto this winter. There are a lot of kids who wear 97, obviously. There's a lot of kids who wear 34, again, obviously, in Toronto. But there's a lot of kids in Toronto who wear 76. And if you think about it, not that long ago, anybody tied to the Canadiens, you weren't supposed to like here. Like, you weren't supposed to wear those numbers. But, like, PK Subban transcends that. Like, these kids are watching him, his highlights on YouTube, but also, like, his holiday videos, or, when he's with the Montreal Canadiens and they're doing their Christmas video singing Frozen, and he's, having fun, and he's obviously got a personality that attracts people. And the fact that, there's a franchise in the league that got rid of him is still something that I honestly, full disclosure, still have to scratch my head about. It is incredible. And I was talking about this off the top of the show. I was highly critical of the trade when it happened, and I have been ever since. But, I can tell you that as somebody who hosts a 4-hour talk show on Montreal radio every day, like, I miss PK Subban. This was a guy, he pushed the needle. You know what I mean? And you mentioned that documentary in your piece that's been playing on the Canadian movie channel. It's there. It plays like every day. And the reason for that is people watch it, right? Like, he is just, he's the one guy. I remember Barry Pacheski, who writes for Deadspin. Barry's a great dude and he loves hockey, but nobody on Deadspin cares about hockey. Nobody clicks hockey. And I remember him telling me this. The only hockey stories people click on Deadspin
are the PK Subban stories. Other than that, nobody cares about hockey. And that's the thing. I mean, and I don't even know if the NHL is doing a good enough job of sort of capitalizing on this. Like, this is the guy to market the game. He's like born to do it.
That was one of the reasons I wanted to sort of see if I could be a fly on the wall when he came through Toronto, because it does seem, in a very small, only in the NHL kind of way, that they're letting him or maybe moving him a little bit closer to the spotlight. That if you take a look back at the All-Star game in Tampa, they had him, albeit
2 minutes,
they had him on a microphone introducing, a couple of bands, one on the weekend in Tampa, and he's up there introducing Steven Stamkos, and he's front and center on, certainly the Canadian broadcast. Rogers had him on, that he is evolving into a broader national spokesperson. And you look at, all the qualities that he exemplifies. I mean, the philanthropy is one thing, but so much of it, the important part of that is that so much of it seems genuine. How many YouTube clips?
90 seconds.
He was in Montreal of all of a sudden there's PK Subban pulling off the road because he sees a ball hockey game and he's getting in there and he's playing ball hockey, right? Like, that's genuine stuff. Why else would you do that? So, this isn't to take away from Shea Weber, who has had a wonderful career and is very obviously a very good defenseman. But the trade away a very good defenseman who is just that little bit younger, who also, does a thing that involves selling the game and selling hockey. And not to get too broadly edged,
1 minute.
There is a concern on the grassroots level, and I think it's creeping in, to the upper levels, that hockey is, even in Canada, going to have to start selling itself soon, because kids can do other stuff. They can go play basketball. They can, you can do things year round. You can play year-round soccer now, where you couldn't do that when I was a kid. So hockey's going to find itself in a position within a generation where it's going to have to be selling itself and marketing itself just as hard as soccer, basketball,
40 seconds,
the other sports have for years now.
Sean, I'll let you get to practice. Have fun out there, and thank you for making time for us. A great piece.
Hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Cheers. That's Sean FitzGerald from The Athletic. I'm Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime. Coming up next, oh no. If you get triggered when we talk about PK Subban, you may want to skip the next one too. Marc Dumont, also with The Athletic, on Subban's return to Montreal and what's going on with the Montreal Canadiens, is coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Okay, he's there. I got a empty netter from last night or the night before, and then we'll turn your mic on.
The Canadiens drive it in deep. Elliott out of the net. Steers it to the side of the goal. The Flyers spin it the rest of the way, all the way down the ice. They score! Into an empty goal. It's Ivan Provorov. Not exactly what he meant to do, but it's goal number 10 of the year. And that'll give the Flyers the 2-goal lead again with 56 seconds to play.
Yeah, that was the Montreal Canadiens' latest loss. They did it in regulation. They did it in what I thought was a fairly entertaining game. This is exactly what the Montreal Canadiens need to do. This is my dream. They lose in regulation in entertaining fashion. If they do that for the next 29 games, I'll be happy. I got to watch all these damn games. So hopefully we'll see more of that from a Habs fan standpoint, and for the sanity of somebody who has to watch all these games. I don't have a choice. Neither does our next guest. He is a contributor with the Athletic. He's not a contributor. He works with the Athletic Montreal. He's also got a radio show on TSN 1200, soon to be syndicated, I think, or he was a part of a radio show. Let's find out what's going on with Marc Dumont, our friend from the Athletic and other wonderful places. Hello, Marc.
Hello, Connor. I like that. Master of Puppets to introduce me. That's good. Can I get to pick the next Metallica song?
Sure. What would it be?
Oh, actually, I don't have one lined up, but I can go. How about Whiplash? Can we go old school?
Sure. I don't see why not. You're the boss. So absolutely. It
reminded me kind of what's going on with the Senators right now, though. Master of Puppets. When I see Dorion get an extension, and I see Melnick in the background. I think that song would be appropriate.
Well, they couldn't fire. And what do you think? Like, is that your feel for Pierre Dorion, that he's essentially he got himself an extension because he has proven himself to be willing to do Eugene Melnick's bidding?
I think so to a certain extent, Connor, because you look at, so they lost their leader and then Anselmi and they lost Alfredson. That's 3 executives that couldn't really right the ship. And what I think happened here is that they decided they're going to trade Carlson. Now, I have no proof, but I get the sense that they said that, and Selmy said, fine, I'm out. And Dorion said, hey, I want a job, so I'm in.
Huh. Interesting. Well, that's going to be a fascinating thing to see play out. I mean, listen, I wouldn't want to trade Erik Karlsson, but it would be a fun exercise, you know what I mean, to be the guy to trade Erik Karlsson and see if you can actually do something that can help the franchise going forward. So, well, that's something to keep an eye on. You want to tell me about?
Yeah, I just should we talk about other Norris winning defensemen that have been traded in the past?
Let's shall we? Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's the risk here. Is that
does Shea Weber have a Norris?
No, I don't think he does have a Norris, but he wore a letter at the World Cup, so
all right,
that's essentially as good here. But I think the rule of thumb here is trading away young Norris-winning defensemen is always a bad idea.
There's no way you can win that trade, right? I mean, you could even sort of extend this. Like, nobody ever trades a superstar player who is sort of still in their 20s and wins that trade, right? Like, is there one example?
I can look at a guy like no, I mean, you go from Joe Thornton all the way to Taylor Hall, and with Subban in between, Chris Chelios before him, Wayne Gretzky. There's absolutely no example of trading away an elite player. Exactly, because you know what happens for the next 10 years? You try to draft that player again, right? So you essentially get rid of one of the best players in the NHL, and then you turn around and say, hey, what do we need? We need one of the best players in the NHL now. Let's do all we can to get him. So I know the Senators are in a tough situation with Karlsson, but if they trade him away, the best player in the history of their franchise, they're going to be trying to find a new Karlsson for the next 30 years.
What do you do with Karlsson if it was up to you? And Eugene Melnick notwithstanding, would you essentially hand him a blank check?
Yeah, absolutely, because I couldn't justify having Bobby Ryan making almost $7 million, having Dion Phaneuf making almost $8 million a year, and then try to penny pinch my best player, who's worth 3 times more than them combined. To me, that never made sense. I know people are afraid of paying good players a lot of money, but when we have a league where third-line players get $3-4 million, then it's fine to pay guys like Karlsson and Connor McDavid $10, $12, $13 million. That's their value. There's exponential value for being elite, in my opinion, in the NHL. I think there's not a huge difference between the fourth and the second line. But once you get to those top pairing guys, those elite forwards, that's where you have to pay. And to me, it makes no sense to penny pinch Carlson. He even said he might have to make him take a discount to stay, which to me, if I'm an athlete, I think, you know what, I'm going to get paid. It's as simple as that.
Well, especially if, like Carlson, you've been playing at far below market value for the prime years of your career already.
No, that's exactly it. And anytime you try to play hardball with them, we saw it in Montreal with Subban. They tried to play hardball with him, gave him a bridge contract, turns around and he wins the Norris Trophy. So right away, he pushed himself up to the $10 million mark just by essentially proving pro scouting wrong. Now, the NHL is finally catching up and realizing, hey, these guys that move the puck, they're going to make some mistakes. But while they're on the ice, their teams are so much better. So maybe there's been a shift in philosophy the last couple of years. And I hope that's the case because they make hockey exciting. To get back to what you were talking about earlier, having a guy like Subban on the ice, having guys like Carlson, they make it fun for the fans. And I know coaches are basically there to coach the fun out of it. That's not how you necessarily win games. But we have to realize you two are paying good money to go watch players. So you need electrifying players like PK Subban. And as we've seen with the Canadiens, there's not much left that's exciting on that roster right now. So it's a little tough for the Montreal Canadiens fans at the moment.
Well, maybe you've already answered my next question with what you've just told me and how you believe that the Senators are going to trade Erik Karlsson. But is Ottawa, a team that was a goal away from the Stanley Cup final a year ago, and what a terrible drop-off they've suffered this season. It's not terrible if you're not a Senators fan, mind you. And the Canadiens, who are division winners, 100-point team a year ago, and are also very bad, albeit not as bad as the Senators. So two Atlantic Division franchises that are clearly not doing well, geographically close to one another. Is Ottawa worse off than the Canadiens are right now in terms of their long-term outlook?
I'm going to say yes, and not because of hockey operations per se. I
have Whiplash queued up, just so you know.
The Canadiens, there's guys like Ryan Poehling in there, Noah Jolson, but, there's no blue chippers. Ryan Poehling, if he turns out to be a good third-line center, I think you're happy. Noah Jolson, if he ends up being a fourth, fifth defenseman, again, I think you're happy. Whereas the Senators have some higher-end guys in there, like Colin White, Thomas Chabot, who, by all intents and purposes, could become a top-pairing defenseman. So I like that part of it. I think up front, they're both similar. They both have a pretty young core. You have guys like Mark Stone on one side, guys like Max Pacioretty on the other, Gallagher, Drouin, Galchenyuk. The Canadiens are still young too. But here's where I think the Habs have a huge advantage is they have stability. Right now, we don't know if the Senators are going to be in town in 5 years. I don't think Gary Bettman would ever allow them to move, but they've got an old rink. Fans aren't going. They keep firing their CEOs, their CFOs. The fans absolutely do not trust the owner one little bit, and they have a lack of vision right now. And Guy Boucher is struggling to adapt. He's the kind of coach that takes a bad club and makes them pretty good. But once he has talent, I think he struggles a little bit, kind of like what we saw from Michel Therrien all those years with the Canadiens. So I think overall, the Senators are in a worse situation just because there's a lack of stability in that franchise.
Well, I think that's sort of well stated. And I guess the other thing, though, that could tip the balance here is, and I don't know what's going to happen to Karlsson, and if they do trade him before the deadline, but if the Senators win the draft lottery, does that change?
I don't think it should because, okay, so you have Rasmus Dahlin coming in, 18-year-old defenseman. Is he going to make the jump right away? Some say he can, but defensemen that make the jump to the NHL are few and far between, especially when it comes to puck-moving defensemen. What's the last puck-moving defenseman that jumped in at 18 years old? For the Habs, I guess it would be they had the defenseman about 25 years ago that they drafted. They're not Peter Svoboda.
Yeah, okay, wow.
Yeah, exactly. So, it doesn't happen very often. And I always look at draft picks. I never really them as franchise altering unless you have a generational guy like Matthews or McDavid. If not, you're looking at 3, 4, maybe even 5 years before they establish themselves as a presence. So I think you should, by that time, Erik Karlsson will be 32 years old. I think you should basically take it as, hey, we got a really good guy coming up, but don't plan around him for the time being because we all know that defensemen take a very long time to make it to the NHL. And then there's guys like Zadina who could be very good. There's a few Russians up there, a few wingers as well, but not guys that I see as impact players in year 1, 2, or even 3.
I'm looking here, and I see Alex Pietrangelo apparently made the Blues when he was 18. That was like 10 years ago.
And I think he played like a handful of games that year, right?
Is that right? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Drew Doughty.
Well, it's so rare.
Drew Doughty made the Kings, but also I don't know if I'd necessarily call him a puck-moving defenseman. He can move the puck, certainly, and is a great defenseman.
Right.
Anyway, all right. So with Marc Dumont here on the morning show. Oh, God.
And by the way, we know that, though, we're not in the morning show this time, Connor. We all know that. You know who's going to win the lottery, right?
Edmonton.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about this before. And my theory is if Edmonton wins, we fold the league. And I think everyone agrees. We start a new one, and we leave Edmonton out of it. They've gotten there.
We'll start the XHL.
But there's no political statements in that.
Exactly.
XHL, right?
No players are taking a knee in the XHL. That's correct. Everybody's standing for the anthems. That's the important thing. All right, we're talking to Marc Dumont here on Hockey Primetime. We're with you until 7 o'clock tonight. The Canadiens host the Nashville Predators tonight. PK Subban returns to Montreal and does so for the second time since he was traded for Shea Weber all those years ago. I talked about this off the top of the show, Mark, but I don't think anybody should oversimplify here. I don't mean to suggest that this trade is the reason for the rising fortunes of the Predators and the sagging fortunes of the Canadiens. However, it certainly is a factor and probably a significant one. But isn't it amazing sort of to chart the two franchises and the fact that Nashville went from perennial playoff team who couldn't really get out of the first round, never got out of the second round, to Stanley Cup contender. While you look at the Canadiens now, and mind you, Weber's been hurt for most of this season. In fact, he's been hurt for basically all of this season and has missed about half of it. The fortunes of the team. I mean, if you're to chart the two franchises, one of them sort of took off, and one of them is now falling off the bottom of the graph.
Yeah, well, and out of all of this, there's when you look at the personal players situation, I kind of feel bad for Shea in all this. Yes, he's a millionaire. Yes, he plays hockey for a living. That's great. But, he didn't want to get pulled out of Nashville. He was quite happy in Nashville. So that part is unfortunate. Now, the flip side for PK Subban, I don't think he could have gotten traded to a better franchise for him. He seems to have, the city embraces stars. So I'm not saying Montreal doesn't embrace stars, but clearly the management had a hard time understanding that nowadays in the sports world, you brand your stars. It happens in the NFL, happens in the NBA, happens in the MLB. Hockey's a little slower to catch up there. And Subban was ahead of the curve. He wanted to brand himself. So the Canadiens saw that, basically as an affront to their philosophy. And that's, I think, probably part of how they got rid of him or why they got rid of him. But to get back to your actual, point of trending upwards and downwards, you can't ignore this, right? I mean, we can't ignore the fact that it's not just Weber. To me, I think it's the whole philosophy of the Canadiens, how they built their defense. They saw PK Subban as a liability. So instead of looking at the 997 times he brought the puck up the ice perfectly and it led to a scoring chance, they focused on the 3 times that he gave it away and it ended up being a goal against. Well, in the long run, when you don't let your players be creative, essentially, they won't make mistakes, but they also aren't going to score. And I think that's what we've seen. The Canadiens develop into a team that really doesn't create much from the back end. You went from a team that had Beaulieu, Markov, Petrie, Subban in their top 4. So you got 4 guys that can move the puck really well. And then there was one. Now there's Jeff Petrie left. There's Shea Weber who's there, who's a very good defenseman. He's just not the same type of player as Subban. And you have Carl Alsner there who struggles to move the puck 20 feet. And you're also missing a number 3 or number 2. So to me, what happened with Subban was just an indication that their vision of how they're building their defense, their roster, their asset management was clearly a failure and kind of lagging behind where the NHL is now. And I'm sure if they had to redo it, they'd probably hold on to a guy like Markov because regardless if he was old, he made the Canadiens score, right? So to me, I think the issue here is not necessarily that you traded Subban, not necessarily that you let Radulov and Markov go. It's that you didn't replace them with guys that were as creative. And you and I watch all the games, Connor. The Habs are a fairly boring team. I think there's a huge lack of creativity there at the moment.
Yeah. Listen, maybe all of this was part of an elaborate plan to get Jeff Petrie to play the best hockey of his career, you know, because that's what he's doing right now. It's just, no, it's incredibly, it's almost, maddening to watch. And that's the thing is like, it's one thing to be bad. It's another thing to be boring. And they are
bad and boring. See, I'm like you. I don't have a rooting interest in this team. Obviously, the further the Canadiens go, the more work I tend to get. But I just want to watch a hockey game, just like you. That's entertaining. Even if they lose, 5-3, as long as you give me something to root for. One of the signs I think that the Canadiens are kind of losing that excitement was 3 years ago. The open practices they have, the Provigo practices. 3 years ago, they sold out 21,273. Last year, they had about 13 or 14,000 kids show up. This year, they had about 8,000. So, this is an event that players used to come to Montreal and say, hey, wow, this is crazy. You guys have so many people at an open practice. What's going on? And now they're pulling, Carolina Hurricanes type numbers to their open practice. So I think the fans are slowly and surely catching on. We live in a society where if you want to follow Barcelona, you can do it from Montreal. If you want to follow, the LA Kings, you can do that too. So we have so many options nowadays that the whole tribalism, the loyalty thing for the crest, I think is slowly yet surely falling to the wayside. And the Canadiens have relied on that their entire existence. But at least they didn't pull the torches out for the opening ceremony this year. That I was glad to see.
Yeah. I guess one thing at a time. It's just, I think that's all. The points are really well made and well stated. It's just, the thing that I worry about with this team, a team that I grew up, loving and really, I've spent a large part of my life talking about and following very closely the Montreal Canadiens. I don't consider myself a fan anymore, but I do care. I'm not going to pretend I don't care. That's why it makes me laugh. I hear people that suggest to me because I'm critical of the team that I want the team to fail or that I'm rooting for the team to fail. This could not be further from the truth. It's just.
You don't want to make your life harder. I mean, when the team loses, it's tough on everyone, not just fans. I mean, the media has got to scrape the bottom of the barrel too here.
And it's everybody. It's people who own bars and restaurants downtown. It's
the waitresses not getting the tip.
Exactly.
I'm with you.
It's such a lifeblood of this city. You know what I mean? And it's. I've been watching them for a long time. I can honestly say I've never been, I really haven't. And maybe it's just because like the internet wasn't really around at the time of the early 2000s when they were terrible. I've never been less optimistic about the future of this team than I am right now. And maybe it's not as bad as I think, but it feels bad, Mark. It feels bad. And it's not like if I was just like I used to be, like obsessed, like just a fan who would live and die with the team every night, I don't even know like how I would deal with this. And now I'm just like philosophical about it. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Well, I think we've seen the results, especially on social media. There's a clear divide, right, between the people that are frustrated with this team and the ones that will, no matter what, defend anything the franchise does, to the death. There's no space for nuance there. But here's the good news. Okay, so they maybe don't have very many prospects. They might have a really terrible AHL team. They might have one of the worst defensive cores in the NHL, but their forwards are young. So, hey, there's a silver lining, Connor.
I guess. But are they that good? And are they going to trade away?
No, they're young. I said they were young. They're not good. They're young.
Right.
No, I look at guys like Drouin and Galchenyuk, and I think, hey, there's something there. You still have Lehkonen. You have Udon. These are all guys that are under 23 years old. Brendan Gallagher, who, if Max Pacioretty gets traded, you should have a C ready for his jersey immediately because he's the captain out there.
Right.
The whole team has essentially fallen into a shell, and Brendan Gallagher is going around. It reminds me of P.K. Subban a couple of years ago, to be honest. Everyone was stuck in their foxhole when you have a guy like Subban or Gallagher running around trying to save the day. So, I have optimism, but not a lot, Connor. And you know me, I try to look for the silver lining.
Sure.
There aren't very
and I like that. And, I think that Hudon, Lehkonen are NHL players and they will have good careers. You know what I mean? Jonathan Drouin, the talent is undeniable. Here's something else that's undeniable, though, and this is just sort of an afterthought when it comes to this catastrophic season. Jonathan Drouin, the first guy you mentioned, has 7 goals in 49 games. Charles Hudon has 7 goals in 51 games. Arturi Lehkonen, I believe the number is 5 goals he has this season. He just got his 5th the other day, and it's in 38 games. Like, It's not just that things are bad. It's just that like everything is lining up, right? It's like everybody's having a disappointing season, not just one or two people, but basically everybody not named Brendan Gallagher and Jeff Petrie has been a disappointment this year. It is remarkable what's happened this year.
The crazy part is, and I mean, I know Brendan Gallagher, I'd say he's been the best forward. He's only a few points above his pace last year where he had a terrible season. So even the best player for the Canadiens, honestly, but to his credit, he's doing it with a guy called Thomas Lukan, who great defensively, but an absolute black hole on offense. So I give some credit for Gallagher there. He's making that third line or whatever line it is, because I don't think you can number the Canadiens, their lines right now. They have a top 12, and that's about it. But Gallagher, for all his efforts, he's doing it with bad teammates, and he's scoring goals. So he's maybe been the only other good story for the Canadiens this year. Because, you know, we're talking about entertainment. I love that this guy, Canadiens are losing 5-0. He's still going out there 100 miles an hour. And that's, I think, something that fans like to see.
Right.
I'm grasping at straws here, but it's what Gallagher does best.
Mark, thank you as always. That was fun, and we went way longer than we were supposed to. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, Connor.
And this song's for you, bud. Is he gone?
There it is.
Yeah?
There it is.
All right. Got it teed up for you. Now, if you weren't listening 20 minutes ago, Mark said he was going to request a Whiplash by Metallica. So here we go. Coming up next, we've got Emily Kaplan of ESPN joining us. The end of an era. That's next? Oh, okay, sorry. We've got Alison Lukan joining us from The Athletic next. As the Columbus Blue Jackets are reeling right now. Is it panic time in Columbus? So we'll talk to Alison about that, what's going on with the team and the system on Hockey Primetime right after this.
Throws it ahead. Tyler Bozak walks in. Shoots. Save made by Sergei Bobrovsky. And a turnover, and here comes Panarin up the ice. Does he have any gas left in the tank? He's got a man fresh off the bench, and he finds that man. That's Werenski. Puts it in front. Panarin shoots, and he scores. And I got two words for you. Game over.
Yes, happier times for the Columbus Blue Jackets on a 5-game losing streak, the longest of the season. You can't really get away with losing streaks like that, not when you're in that division. and they take on the New Jersey Devils tonight at 7 o'clock. With more on the Columbus Blue Jackets story, we welcome back to the show from The Athletic, Alison Lukan. Alison, welcome.
Hey, Connor, thanks for having me. This would be the time for you to come to Columbus. There's not a lot of cannon fire these days.
That's a fair point, I suppose. And you know what? I bet the weather is better than it is here as well. So I don't need much more. I go to a great schnitzel down there as well. So, I mean, that's a trifecta I'm looking for. All right. So, Alison, what's going on? 0 wins in their last 5. It's 4 losses in regulation. And that 1 3-pointer that they managed to pick up a point in but still lost. What's going on with the Jackets?
Yeah, it's weird time for the team. It is interesting. The coaches and the players are trying to stay optimistic, and I kind of took a look at that when they were all saying, but we're playing well. And they are actually starting to play better. They had a long stretch there where they were basically out an entire forward line with injuries, and for a while there they were also out a defensive pair. And it was during that phase that I think their game took a lot of hits in terms of being up to the quality that it was. So they used up that good grace of the hockey gods in terms of eking out some wins. They kind of hovered right about 500 in that stretch. But now they have no margin for error. And now they're playing better, cannot finish. I mean, this team is, I think their shooting percentage as a team is down almost 3 or 4% compared to last year.
Wow.
And this is a team that just can't put the puck in the net. And they've also really kind of changed defensively. Last year, they were second in the league in terms of goals against. And this year, they're only averaging 2 goals for per game and letting in close to 3. So the way they're playing defensively has weakened, and they just can't finish. It's one of the craziest things I've seen.
And I listen, now I'm not watching this team nearly as closely as you are, so I'd love to hear your take on this. But you're going to war with a 19-year-old kid as your top center in Pierre-Luc Dubois. Like, I know he's a good player, but you don't see a lot of teams succeed with that formula. Am I sort of oversimplifying here? Or if you would, please sort of let me know what you think of that.
Sure. Yeah, it's PLD has done great, actually. I think he has surpassed expectations. They weren't even sure that kid would be playing down the middle this year. They started him at wing at the beginning of the season. But part of him being that first-line center is the symptom of these scoring challenges that we're seeing in their other centers. You know, Alexander Wenberg is not putting near enough points on the board compared to what he did last year. Brandon Dubinsky, struggling offensively and then also out for close to 5 weeks with a facial injury. I mean, last year, Wenberg had 59 points, and now he's not even in the top 10 of this team. So it's when those guys can't perform, PLD gets elevated up, and he's performing. But I think you're right. This isn't a guy that, I mean, if this team does make the postseason, you don't know what you have there with him in a first-line center role going into a playoff series. And that's not a ding on the kid, but this is just a first for him in a big-time league and a big-time role.
And they've got so many good players on this team. They've got a 2-time Vezina winner in goal. They have 2 guys who should be Norris contenders for the next decade or so in Jones and Werenski, and one of the best defensive pairings in the game. But overall, up the middle, like, is that, if there is a weakness for this team, and it's one that a lot of teams have, is it the center ice position?
Yeah, you know, I think that they could definitely use some depth. If you remember, this was a team that was in those conversations for Duchesne going all the way back to June and July. So I think that they knew early that was something that they needed. I think that what the interesting flip of having those 2 defensemen who are so good is that Tortorella has basically given them free rein and said, he calls them rovers, and he says, just go play. If you see a chance offensively, go. And the forwards will back you up. And so I don't wonder, too, if that's part of the challenge for this team, is that the forwards are having to think about a whole other part of the game now that maybe wasn't their first instinct before. And particularly a centerman, back to your original question, a guy who's already asked to play the full game and now is thinking, gosh, I have to be a little bit more focused defensively. you might be sucking away a little bit of their offensive focus as well.
Things do have a way of sort of evening out over time in this game. And I think about the season that the Blue Jackets had a year ago, and I don't mean to suggest that like this is the Colorado Avalanche of a couple of years ago that we're talking about, but man,
Right.
did the breaks ever go their way last year, from injuries to bounces to everything else. I mean, they just had a remarkably sort of fortunate, if you want to put it that way, or lucky season. Is there any kind of a feel that maybe just some of the bounces are going the other way this year?
You literally could step in for John Tortorella in some of his press availabilities lately. He said exactly that. He said, last year, everything that could go right went right. They had that huge winning streak, which basically, they were in the playoffs 11 games before the season was done. Torts actually said 2 days ago, I think, he said, I didn't even know how to coach this team because we didn't really have anything left to fight for. We were in with all the games left to play. And he's admitted, this year, this is a challenge. This is what a real NHL season looks like, where you have to claw and grab and fight and take some lows with some highs and really test the mettle of what a team is all about. So there is definitely a feel that this is the swing of the pendulum. And, again, to this inability to get the goals in the net, he won't say it's purely puck luck. He wants his players to fix the problem, but he will admit that this team just isn't getting the bounces, especially compared to the way they did last year. And
that's it. I mean, this does happen a lot, but as we mentioned, they've got a really nice group and a very bright future, right? I wonder this too. I mean, you mentioned John Tortorella. What's his situation right now? Expectations can be a funny thing, and this is a guy who often has had a little bit of a shelf life in his various stops around the National Hockey League and a very distinguished coaching career. How safe is he if this season ends in disappointment?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I also wonder how long Torts wants to be in the game to keep going. I mean, he obviously wants to win, but he knows he's probably closer to his finish than his start at this time. But I think right now, this next month is going to tell us a lot. They have, of the 13 games they have in January, 10 are against Metro opponents. And so by the end of this month, they're going to know what's going on. I think how this team handles it will shed a lot of light on not just that question about Tortorella, but also deadline, et cetera, so forth. Torts knew this season was coming. This is the kind of year he talked about, even in his exit interviews at the end of last season, that it was going to be a struggle, that it wasn't going to be easy, that the team couldn't get satisfied with what they did. So I think that if this team can pull themselves out of this mire and get back into the playoff hunt, I think he's okay. He's got one more year after this that he's committed to the club. But if it all just falls apart, which honestly I can't see happening, who knows? But I think he's okay right now.
With news, and we knew that Rick Nash was on the market, but the Rangers certainly made it official with an exclamation point the other day. You got fans in Columbus who want Rick Nash back?
Yeah, Rick was such a light of hope for this franchise for so long that there's a lot of people who want to see Rick finish his career here in Columbus. There's a lot of talk of, will his jersey ever be retired in the halls of Nationwide Arena? We know he's probably going to be in the conversations for a move. I think he eventually does come to Columbus, maybe for his swan song, but I don't think it's this year. I think it's not really what the team needs, and that's not a ding on the player. But I also think my colleague Aaron Portzline made the great point. He doesn't think this is Nash's last year either. And so I don't think this is a move you make for a player who wants to do something next. It's not a price that the Jackets necessarily want to pay, either in prospects or perhaps cap space with what they think this team needs. So it's a nice nostalgic story, but I think Jackets fans might have to wait a couple more seasons or so before they see Rick back in the Blue Jackets sweater.
All right. So geriatric Rick Nash or geriatric Nash. Huh?
I like it.
Thank you. I kid you not. That it came to me. Alison, thank you. A pleasure as always. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
That's Alison Lukan with The Athletic in Columbus, covering the Blue Jackets. Let's change gears. I want to talk about the Rangers, Rick Nash, and more. What does that letter to the fans mean, and why was it so well received? Emily Kaplan of ESPN is going to be joining us next, and we'll talk to her about that. I want to talk some Olympic hockey with Emily as well. So stick around for more Hockey Prime Time right after this. And it was good. You know, sometimes we go too long, and it was just both of those segments were good. You know, they didn't really drag. At least they didn't feel like they did to me.
I'm always starving. Like, if I don't bring a snack here, I'm always hungry.
I don't have much to offer you. I'm not gonna lie. My cousin's staying here. This guy, it's unbelievable. Showed up here yesterday. He's like, no, he's from here, but his whole family lives in Toronto now. They all moved there, so I'm his only family. And he moved out of his place because it was like it had cockroaches. He moved in and was like, "There's cockroaches here. Like, this is insane." Like, and he moved, so he had to get somebody to sublet it and move. And he just showed up here yesterday. He's like, "Hey, need a place to stay." I'm like, "Oh, fuck. Like, you don't call? Like, what's going on?" Anyway, he's staying here.
I feel like my place is too dirty. You have to find somewhere else.
I mean, he's family. I can't turn him away, you know?
Yeah.
And I love him. But, oh, my mic's on. Anyway, he doesn't watch the show. He's a good boy.
Is he gone? Is he not?
Yeah, he went to work.
Okay.
Yeah, the door was closed, so we didn't notice. Da, da, dun, 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 dun. But I don't know what he works at a restaurant. He works at the tavern, and he also works at Nora Gray. But yeah, it doesn't do much.
Like, I don't know. Uninvited for me is always tricky because I'm a clean person, but I'm a messy person.
I had told him he could come stay here. He just didn't tell me that it was happening then or that it was happening at all. But I was like, of course you're welcome to come stay.